Hey guys, welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about another of my childhood favorite books. We will be discussing my thoughts and opinions on my latest reread of Magyk by Angie Sage. Now this is the first book in the Septimus Heap series, for those of you guys who don't know, but the Septimus Heap series is one of my absolute favorites. I love it so much. I read the second book like 10 times within the span of a year when I was in middle school. I loved this series. So I picked it up again over quarantine, thinking that it might be fun to reread it, and I have so many things to talk about in this latest reread of the first book, Magyk. So let's jump right on into it. Just a heads up, there will be spoilers in this, so if you haven't read the book, I would definitely suggest reading the book first. If you don't mind spoilers, go ahead and watch. It's up to you. So there are so many amazing characters in this book that I absolutely love. And I'm going to talk about some of my favorites and some of the things that I love about them. So let's talk about Boy 412, aka Septimus Heap. We learn that later in the book. But he has probably my favorite story arc of any character in this series. I love him so much. I don't think I can say how much I love him. So the start of Boy 412's story is actually really fascinating to me because we don't meet him officially until chapter 4. And by chapter 4, so many different things have been set up. We've already met the Heep family, we've already met Marcia and Arthur, and so you're not expecting them to introduce an entirely new and really critical character so late in the story setup, but we do. And again, it's a little bit of a red herring, and I love that because when we meet him, it's just sort of a passing moment. Marcia says hi, well, not really hi. Marcia talks to him because he's guarding the wizard tower, and then she moves on, and we forget he exists until chapter 7. And chapter 7 is really when his storyline becomes intertwined with the Heeps and with Jenna and with Marcia and everyone else's storyline. So I love that it sort of throws us off his scent trail multiple times. For one, we don't meet him until chapter 4, and 2, even when we do meet him, he seems like a totally unimportant character. And this is just such a big thing in this book. I love it. I love how the tiniest detail in the first sentence of chapter 3 or 4 can come back 3 books later, 4 books later, and still be just as important. And this foreshadowing theme is really, really big in this book. They foreshadow so many different things. Some of them are big, huge plot points. Some of them are tiny things like the storm petrel that Aunt Zelda talks about and looks for after every big storm. I am a huge, huge fan of foreshadowing in books. I love when you can read it the first time and not catch any of those details, but then the second time you read it, because you know things, you'll go back and you'll see all these little setups that you missed the first time around. So I got a little off track there, and I'm going to come back to that because there are so many different foreshadowing moments that I love. But going back to Boy 412, his story arc is amazing because we forget about him until chapter 7, and then in chapter 7 he is thrown into this world of wizards and magic, and he grew up as Boy 412 of the Young Commander's army. He was raised thinking wizards are evil and he needs to run away from it. So for basically the first half of the book, Boy 412 is convinced that he is a prisoner. I love when we get those little tidbits of Boy 412's perspective and point of view, having seen Jenna's point of view and Marcia's point of view, and I love it so much because it's such a contrast. Because Boy 412, he has no idea what's going on, and he's just convinced that he is a prisoner. Even while I love that aspect of him and how his perspective contrasts from everyone else's, I also, he frustrates me. Because these people save his life 6 times over, and he's still being, like when they're being pursued by the hunter, for example, and Jenna covers his mouth so that he doesn't shout out because he was going to call out to the hunter, and so he kicks the boat, and it basically nearly gets them caught by the hunter, and you want to smack some sense into him and say, dude, you are among the good guys. But as frustrated as that makes you, it also makes for such a great redemption arc because you can't get somewhere else without starting out frustrating or bad. So he needs to improve somehow. Boy 412 then ends up going to Aunt Zelda to stay with Aunt Zelda with Jenna and Nico, and these scenes in Aunt Zelda's cottage, they take up most of the book, but this is where we get to see him fully change. Once he was at Aunt Zelda's house, that is where the flip switches in his mind, and he says, okay, maybe I'm not exactly where I thought I was right now. Because he has so much time and so much care, and he's included here, and he's fantastic, and I love this so much. I love his arc. I think it's so slow burning that it makes you wait for every moment, and it's only once you get to the end that you say, wow, that was so good. So another big moment in Boy 412's arc is way later in the book. It is basically in one of the final chase scenes when the hunter is chasing Jenna and Nico and Boy 412, and Boy 412 pushes Jenna into the bush to stop her from being shot by the hunter, and jumps after her shouting, "Jenna!" And oh my gosh, this part makes your heart just burst. This is the first sentence he's ever said to anyone, and it's so different, and it's so perfect. It's the perfect culmination of his arc. That final step is speaking to them and talking, and I think this is such a creative way to show the culmination of his story arc. I love it. I really love it. And then it just goes up from there. And then at the very end of the book, in the last chapter, they scry in the full moon and they ask who his family is, and it just shows their normal reflections, and they're all like, ugh, and this is just another moment where they make you wait for it. You know exactly where it's going, but they make you wait for it, and it just draws out the moment so perfectly. Not too long, but just enough to make you so excited for when then he asks the moon who his mother is, and the reflection in the pond shows only Sarah Heap, and it's just, ugh, it hits you right there. And then they take off the red hat that he's worn the entire time, and then this big straw-colored wavy hair bursts from his head, and he shakes his head like a boy shaking off his old life and his old fears and accepting his new life. He is Septimus Heap. And oh my gosh, this is perfect, because this is not where you expect the book to be going when you start it. You are not introduced to this character until chapter 4, chapter 7, and you don't expect the big climax of the character to be about someone you don't even know about in the first a third of the book. And I love it so much. I think it's amazing. I think it's such a perfect ending to the story, and it's really, the entire story has been building up to this the entire time. Okay, so that is Septimus Heap, Boy 412. So the next character I wanted to talk about was Jenna. You start off thinking Jenna is going to be the main character because it talks about her, and the first few chapters are in her perspective, and she is actually the main character for most of the beginning of the book. So you'd think she's going to be the main character for the rest of it, but she really isn't. She is the conflict, while Septimus Heap is the main character. So Jenna essentially starts out, she grows up her first 10 years of her life in this awesome, loving household with her 6 older brothers, and Silas and Sarah Heap taking care of her as her adopted parents. She doesn't know she's adopted. And then all of a sudden, one day, Marcia, the extraordinary wizard, shows up and says, I have to take you away. And one of the big things that struck me throughout Jenna's story is that she barely reacts the entire time to almost anything. Jenna's turmoil is still there, and it takes a little digging to figure out that it's still there. Because when we get to Aunt Zelda's cottage, I think there are 6 different moments when she mentions that she doesn't have a family. And she's talking to Nico and she mentions their dad, and then she says, oh, sorry, I mean your dad. And every single time, someone is there to say, don't be silly, we are your family, we love you, you grew up with us. Those little moments, those are the indicators of Jenna's turmoil. A lot of her turmoil is more inside her head, and we don't really get to explore that, so you have to search out those tiny little moments and those tiny indicators showing that she's actually struggling here. So that is Jenna. Okay, so the final character that I wanted to talk about, because he is honestly one of my favorite characters throughout the entire series, is Simon Heap. Now, Simon Heap doesn't get a lot of page time in this book. They mention him at the beginning, and then they mention where he goes with the rest of the Heap family, and then he's a lot more integrated into the storyline in like the last 2 chapters. But I think this is such a great beginning to looking at how Simon's character is going to change and develop throughout the series. Now, Magyk is kind of the backstory of Simon's redemption arc. He starts out good, and this book shows his descent into evil. This is kind of the prologue of his story, which is why he doesn't get a lot of page time, but in the next books, I know he gets a lot of page time, and oh, I'm so excited to look at him. So that is all I'm really going to say on him, but I'm going to be keeping my eye on him for the next couple books because I think he has such a fascinating story. I'm going to focus a lot on Simon Heap because I think he's such an interesting character. So we'll come back to him in one of the later episodes, in one of the later books. But for the time being, that covers most of the characters that I wanted to talk about. So let's move on to different things about the book that I really loved this time around, reading it as an older reader, as a more experienced reader, and as someone looking at not just the storyline and the adventure, but the deeper levels of the book, the writing style, the characters. Let's get into that. Okay, so I already talked a little bit about the crazy amounts of foreshadowing in this book. It's insane. There's so much foreshadowing, and it's tiny little things. Like, at the very beginning, we get to see Silas entering the home and seeing Sarah Heap on the ground, sobbing, her 6 boys clustered around her, and the midwife running away with this little bundle wrapped in rags, shouting, "Septimus Heap is dead." And this is something that you think it just sort of sets up the story, but no. It comes back, like, 20 chapters later, when we're all trying to figure out what happened, what exactly happened to Septimus Heap, who is the apprentice that Dom Daniel says is Septimus Heap, and who is Boy 412. Another example of foreshadowing, again, I mentioned this earlier, but the Storm Petrel, I love that. It has nothing to do with the plotline, nothing at all, but it just adds so much more emotion and another level to the story that makes it seem bigger than life, bigger than that just these few plot lines and these few characters intertwined. It is a whole world. It makes you feel as if this world is out there. The Storm Petrel is this tiny little paragraph at some point when Marcia and the 3 kids and Silas Heap are all at Aunt Zelda's cottage. This storm hits because they live in the marshes, and it mentions that Aunt Zelda, when she was younger, her older brother was a shapeshifter and always wanted to fly around the world. So he chose his final shape to be a storm petrel and flew around the world, and Aunt Zelda never saw him again, but she always hoped, because storms like this would blow in storm petrels from the sea, and so after every storm she would go out early in the morning and look for any storm petrels she could find to see if she could find her brother. We get to the last chapter having basically forgotten about this storm petrel because it was pages and pages and pages ago. But we get there and we see this storm petrel watching from above, and it's one of those little things that adds to the story. It adds a little whimsy. It's one of those things that it has nothing to do with the plot line, nothing to do with the story, but it reminds you that there's this whole other world out there beyond Jenna and Boy 412 and Aunt Zelda and Marcia, and it just makes the whole world of the book seem that much bigger. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to talk about are the number of misdirects in this story. It's insane. It's crazy. You think it's gonna start out some way, and then it's gonna go completely another way, and they're so subtle, you don't expect them, but you don't realize you were expecting something else until it goes a completely opposite direction than where you were looking. So, for example, when Jenna and Boy 412 sneak onto the Vengeance, onto Dom Daniel's ship, while he is parked outside the marsh, waiting to attack, and you think this is it, this is the big moment, they find Marcia, they give her the ring to help her power come back, and you think this is going to be the big battle, but no, they sneak off the ship and float back to Aunt Zelda's house, and that is the end of it. And it's things like that you don't expect them, and you don't expect them. You think that it's gonna go somewhere completely different, and then it goes this place in this direction, and then you think, oh my gosh, okay, so that's what they're gonna do. But then they're like, nope, this is what we're gonna do instead. And it's so cool. It is so cool. So the final thing I wanted to talk about in this rave review is the magic in the Septimus Heap world. I love magic systems. I think it's so cool learning how magic works. That's part of the reason I love the Harry Potter books, because we literally live at the school that teaches them how magic works. And I think that is insanely awesome. So let's talk about Septimus Heap magic. So Septimus Heap magic is very different from any magic that I'd ever seen before. In the Harry Potter world, you don't really learn how spells are created. They're just there. The kids are there to learn the spells that have already been created and put into textbooks. But here we get an entire scene where Marcia is explaining how spells are created. You have a wizard that decided to make a spell for this one purpose, and so he writes down the words that help that purpose, and whatever he writes it down on, it is naturally imbued with the magic of that spell. And that is called a charm. And anyone else can then use that charm to learn the spell. And I just think it's so cool how a charm isn't something that works on its own. A charm is something that draws on your own magical abilities, and really in the end, all a charm is a way to remember your spells. And I think that is so cool. It creates a world of possibilities for where this magic can go later in the book. I can't wait to get deeper into the magic of the Septimus Heap world in the later books. That really covers all I wanted to talk about in this review. So we're gonna sign off for today. If you liked this video, if you want to follow the rest of the Septimus Heap series with me, please like it and subscribe. And I can't wait to see where the rest of this series goes. I don't really remember a lot of it. I haven't read them in years, so I'm gonna have a lot of fun with this, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. I would absolutely recommend picking up Magyk and picking up the next Septimus Heap books in the series. And if you have any other comments on things that you think I should have talked about, or things that you want to know about the book that I didn't really touch on, let me know down in the comment section below, and I will see you guys next Wednesday.